Welcome to Executive Access, created for motivated professionals. This is your home for real talk with executives about their career journeys, leadership practices, successes, and learnings along the way. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, we'll hear from Derek Boxdell, Head of Global Sales for Armor Defense. Derek is an unbelievably self-aware and intentional leader in how he shows up and how he communicates and how he leads his business. I was really appreciative of how much Derek opened up about the struggles he had as an early in career leader that he had to overcome. And now that he's an executive leader, how he overcame them and maybe still what he's still working on. The word can't is not in his vocabulary, and you will love to hear where this came from. Let's dive in. Welcome, Derek Boxdell, to Executive Access. I'm so happy to see you. You are the head of global sales at Armor Defense, and you're very well known in the industry for your expertise in cybersecurity and compliance, cloud services. You've got a pretty diverse set of experiences, small companies, large companies. You were a director at Azure at Microsoft, and you also played a pivotal role in the acquisition of FortiCloud by Firemont. So tons of things to talk to you about around your leadership tenure. Welcome. I'm so happy to see you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Jamie. Always fantastic to get to speak with you. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Well, before we get into it, I just love your background. It's the most interesting background, what is behind you. We have, for our listeners, describe what we are seeing. I'm seeing a beautiful picture. I'm seeing a Star Wars spaceship. Like, tell me what's going on behind you.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a closet nerd, if you will. I mean, maybe not so much in the closet since all this stuff is behind me, but
I mean, that's why I'm laughing.
over my right shoulder is a big Lego model of the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. Right behind me is a lightsaber from a video game that I play. Behind that is a Lego bust of Darth Vader. Immediately behind me is a Lego model of an X-Wing. So that's like my nerddom side. And then over my left hand shoulder, it's kind of like a personal, professional, split here. I've got some books behind me, some that are that kind of guide me on my personal and professional journey. And then the picture is a picture of Ruby Bridges by Norman Rockwell. So just as, in the 1940s, 1950s, as segregation was sort of coming to an end and we were integrating from a cultural perspective, Ruby Bridges was one of the first to, there was 7 that were asked to be integrated into schools. And one of the ones that ended up going, not all 7 went, but Ruby went. And so it's a good reminder for me. Something that I want to be able to introduce to my kids, and so just a perspective on history that keeps me grounded, to my everyday life.
Well, I love it. And you have 2 beautiful girls and a son. And I remember years ago during COVID, we were having a conversation on video. And all of a sudden you were like, hang on, Jamie. And you ran across the room and came back with one of your daughters in your lap. And you said, we haven't figured out the daycares haven't opened yet. And she's going for the fire poker. And we spent the rest of our time together with her on your lap. So I love that image for her as well. That's great. Well, thanks for that.
That still happens today. They know when I'm on a call and they know when they need something, they'll make sure to interrupt.
Excellent. Well, so before we dive into all the questions I have for you about your career and your leadership, I'm curious to know what you're working on these days. Anything that you're learning or doing to grow, either personally or professionally?
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the sort of the role that I play today. So moved to a new company, left Microsoft, moved to a new company. I do have the 2 girls and the young boy. Declan, our youngest, was introduced into the world not too long ago, so he's 1 now. So the challenges of parentdom and daddom, sort of keep me spry, if you will. On the professional side, I like to stay up to date when it comes to cybersecurity, and so I'm trying to grow my knowledge there, not because like I need to be the expert on every call, but sometimes it's good for me just to learn a little bit more so that I understand a little bit more when I'm talking to folks, right? So pursuing some certifications on the cyber side of the world, and then I might talk a little bit about this later, but stepping into this new role it requires a professional level of slideware creation, right? So just getting better at slide creation has been a thing for me. On the personal side, I talked a little bit about the Ruby Bridges deal, always trying to grow my knowledge around, my cultural, historical understanding of the U.S., particularly between 1619 and today, just so that I get to understand why we look like we look today, just from a makeup perspective. And then I'm always trying to impart some of that in how I parent the kids, right? I want to make sure that they are very well aware of what's going on around them and why it looks the way it does. So always trying to learn a little bit more there.
I love that. So kind of a mix of great parenting and, raising your kids with awareness, and then staying up to date with all the nuances of cybersecurity as you're growing your career now, an executive at a company. Amazing. Well, I just want to take you back for a second, take you back a few years because I thought it would be fun to share. I remember distinctly how I met you. And it was at some leadership offsite in Dallas when we were both working at the same company. And I'd never met you before. And we were, sort of in the same room. The conference had started. And you didn't say much, but all of a sudden you said something. And I was like, who is that? Because whatever you said was absolutely brilliant. And I couldn't wait for you to speak again. And I don't think you did for the rest of the day. And I remember coming up to you and saying, hey, I want to hear more. Like, what's going on? Why don't you say more? And you just looked at me like, oh, but you're talking too much, Jamie, because I don't like when people talk too much. That's how I sort of remember it. But I was giving you grief, but in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember that. That was my first week at Microsoft, I believe it was.
Oh,
Yeah, so we had the leadership, sort of offsite session. I mean, if you were local, it was on site, but that leadership session and in the room, just to kind of set the stage, it was all. I mean, I'm there, I'm brand new, and in the room, it's all people leaders across SMC, the organization that we supported. And there are some pretty, heavy hitters in the room. And I was very aware of who was there, right? And so I was struggling big time with imposter syndrome, right? Like, did I belong in the room? There's a whole bunch of people here that are smarter than me. And so over time, I've been able to work myself out of that shell. But, I was very aware of what I said, how I was perceived. I didn't want to be the guy on the first day to, kind of know it all. And so, super measured. But I don't know that I needed to be, but the first week was very, very kind of like, hey, just stay out of the way here, and get to week two, and then we'll go from there.
well, I'm feeling really guilty right now because I didn't know that was your first week. I had no idea. So here I am harassing you to speak up more. And it was probably would have been more empathetic for me to understand what you were going through. But I had no idea. So sorry about that. But I did harass you, and I'm glad I did.
But yeah, I think the guidance that you provided around that moment, because we've been able to interact since then, and we referred to that. We kind of go back to that, and I think there's this like you could have spoken up more, right? I think there's this be brief, be bold, be gone, kind of mentality that I've been able to incorporate into the way that I operate since you and I have had discussions about that first week. So I mean, I think you kind of did what you needed to do, recognize that there's an opportunity to grow there.
Okay, then with that, I stand by it. I stand by all the judgment. Well, since we're, you're talking about that, like, I'm curious about how you've grown in your career around, I call it using your voice, right? Because I noticed right away that you had, really thoughtful things to say. And when you spoke, it just made the entire conversation better. What's your growth journey been like around communication? And I'd love to revisit the comment you made about the imposter syndrome around it. Was that just, it would be totally normal to feel that way on your first week of work when you're just getting a lay of the land over who's there, but has that been something that you've dealt with early in your career, and where are you on all that?
It's been a journey. I think the using your voice thing has been a challenge for me, right? I think using your voice is multifaceted, right? So like I think there's some authenticity in there, there's some fear and doubt in there, there's emotional intelligence in there. And when I first started and at least in the professional world, I didn't have all that together. I was really trying to like I was trying to project strength and knowledge when I didn't have any of that stuff. And so I walked in a lot of engagements like thinking I was the smartest person in the room, which wasn't the right approach. And as one might imagine, I was humbled quite frequently. And so over time, and I think there was a growth spurt when it comes to using your voice in 2020 when I was admitted to the leadership program that I really started to get to know you in. But I had to really take a step back and understand why is it that I'm so worried about what people think when I talk. And so there's a fear and self-doubt component to that. For me, it was perception. So trying to really wrestle with how I'm perceived with my peers and why that matters to me. Um, why do I care what my colleagues and leaders think? At least to the degree that it kind of stifled the way that I showed up and presented in front of folks. Um, I listen to podcasts and I watch people. I mimic people. I mimic good talent. I mimic things that I like. And I was watching this deal from Deion Sanders. Deion is the coach of Colorado. He's done a lot. Some people vilify him. Some people love him. But he said something one day that really resonated with me. He's like, um, people talk about me, and that's fine. I have good days and bad days. I'll never have a good. What he said, people have good times and bad times. I'll never have a bad day. I let whatever it is impact me, perhaps for a moment, an hour or two, and I got to shed that thing and then figure out how I'm going to be me. And so that was a recent development, but there's just been this journey for me around why does it matter what folks think of you? Like you're going to present yourself, and you're here for a reason. You're here because you bring a level of integrity. You're here because you bring a level of transparency. You're here because you're valued. And I had to reach back into myself and really think through why am I here? Am I contributing from a value standpoint? And have that bad hour, and then you got to grow. You got to keep moving. So um, yeah, a lot of growth there. There are a couple of more angles to it, but I think the first thing for me was really understanding you don't need to be afraid to use your voice, to be heard. Kind of step into that thing and be you.
Wow. First of all, thank you for sharing that. I promised my listeners some real talk from executives. So I appreciate your real talk around this. And as you're speaking, I am completely empathizing with this. I'm like, yeah, that was me too. Sometimes it is still me when I'm in situations that make me uncomfortable. So what do you do about that? How did you overcome that? It sounds like it's still a work in progress in some lanes, but what did you do to make progress around using your voice in that way, sort of overcoming some of those feelings that you were having?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that I kind of when I was able to take a step back, think about the fear, think about how I showed up authentically and how I could be more consistent in how I showed up. Um, a couple of things started to resonate for me. One was developing self-awareness, and I think just uh, when you step into authentic leadership, which we'll talk about a little later, when you step into kind of like owning your voice, you got to be self-aware, right? So being aware of my strengths and my weaknesses, my emotions, is kind of part step one to that. So be hyper aware of who I am and sort of the value that I bring. And then there are opportunities for me to make sure that I'm sidestepping some of weakness or opportunities in my game so that they don't tank my game, if you will. I think there's the companion piece to that is emotional intelligence. So once I get to grips with my strength and my weakness and my emotions, I've got to be able to recognize so how I show up, and then take stock of how others show up in conversation so that I'm able to pivot when I need to pivot. I think that those are the first two, and those undergird that sort of the voice and authentic leadership. The third thing for me was communication. I had to get really really good at leveraging my voice, but mastering my communication skills, if you will. And so that has a bunch to do with tactical things, projection, how I paused, how I was measured in my delivery, and take a moment to pause, think through what it is that you want to say before you deliver a thought. Um, Prior to me kind of taking that internal stock of how I showed up and how I used my voice, I was very quick to respond because I think I thought I needed to have the answer for everything. And so once I got to grips with like, hey, you don't have to be the one that knows it all. Like, pause for a second, give yourself the opportunity to think and to deliver some value, and then give the value, right? So after that, right, so those first two, the develop the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, and then the communication bit, I got to practice, right? And so I used to think for a while that I didn't really need to practice. Like, I could step into whatever arena it was and be successful. I felt like I was really good at the mimicking thing. I ride a motorcycle in my personal time, and I ride that motorcycle on track. And so like, I could look at someone that was really good in the sport, and I can mimic that person on the track. And I didn't need to do a ton of practice to like get to good with regard to how I rode the bike on track. And I felt like that translated to my professional world, and it really didn't. I needed to take a moment to kind of really practice, internalize what it was that I was learning, and then get to good. And so I did a lot of that, right? So like, hey, how do you authentically inject pause and thought and deliver value? So I had to really think through how to do that and then really step into that.
Wow, so much goodness in that. And I'm hearing a lot of intentionality in it, right? Executive Access is brought to you by The Ideal Life. The Ideal Life offers a multimedia platform that is focused on cultivating a growth mindset. Here you'll find a supportive community, valuable content, and transformative coaching aimed at helping you live a more gratifying and joyful life. Ready to take the next step in your personal growth journey? Visit theideallife.com to explore their wealth of resources and join their vibrant, growing community today. And what's so interesting to me as I hear you say this, that you had to develop self-awareness, I'm going to venture a guess that you had a lot of self-awareness. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking yourself all of these questions that you did already. How, as you were going through that process of the self-awareness and the emotional intelligence and then practicing different communication styles, how are you able to not get caught up in the stress of it or the fear of, all the things? So for example, last night I went home and I had a meeting, and I think it went well, but of course I was thinking about all the questions I should have asked or all the things I should have done, and I wanted to turn that off. How do you moderate being on that journey of growth and also giving yourself a little bit of break as you grow?
That's a good question. And a hard one for me, right? So like, anytime I get positive or negative feedback, I gravitate to the negative. Like, I don't let myself live with the goodness, right? So like, I had to really, pause and say like, hey, like, there are things that you're doing that are positive, and you need to continue moving in that direction. focus on the things that you need to work on and your opportunities, but you can't, to the Deion example a little earlier, you can't live in that space. And I was living in that space. And so after I had the opportunity to kind of take a step back and really think about how I showed up, I had to start giving myself some grace with regard to failure. We're going to fail, but you can't live in that failure. And so I was able to really start, kind of amplifying the positive, taking the negative as growth opportunity, and leaving it in the rearview mirror, focusing on what's in front of me.
Did you notice any difference in what you were practicing as you grew in your career? When I met you, you were a fairly senior leader, but now you're even, way more of a senior leader. Even from that time, did you have to change what you practiced around communication as your responsibilities grew, or the types of activities that you did and the way you communicated had to change?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think the sort of the more my circle expanded, right, and responsibilities expanded, I had to tune the way that I showed up with regard to the using your voice uh, uh, perspective, right? So, like a good example, a critical moment for me on that journey was at Microsoft. I was named an executive sponsor for some partners, right? And not just me, a few folks got to do that. And this is during COVID when this happened. And so, the opportunity was to really help amplify the value of the partner within the Microsoft ecosystem. And Microsoft loves its partners, right? We know this. But I had to really think through, like, how am I going to amplify what it is that the partner's already doing? And for me, cybersecurity is a thing that I'm sort of tied to, and what I wanted to do was was find the natural linkage between what the partner did and what they could help Microsoft do from a security perspective. Microsoft at the time was really trying to drive a holistic message from a security standpoint, and there are a number of challenges across that spectrum when it comes to security, right? Folks are challenged with talent shortage, and that seems to be a challenge that has no end in sight. Folks are challenged with alert fatigue, right? Getting a ton of are inundated with a ton of alerts and not knowing what to do with it. And so working with these partners, I started to lean heavily to cybersecurity. Microsoft wants to do this thing on the cybersecurity side, and you have the ability to do this on the cybersecurity side. And so, not only was I needing to use that voice within the partner ecosystem, but I had to come back into Microsoft and convey to the folks that cared that my partner was uniquely positioned to solve for some of these challenges across cyber. And that led to to some partnerships across the organization, right? So, like, using my voice, I was really thinking about in a sort of one-to-one fashion initially, and then that expanded as my sort of influence circle grew to making connections and collaboration opportunities across the organization. And so started pulling folks in, and we started seeing some success with partners. That eventually led to me being asked to sit in on a cybersecurity council within Microsoft, right? So, and then I got to do more of that, but initially it was a focus on how do I use my voice in this one-on-one, maybe with my leader or my team or whatnot. And then it became this, how do I use my voice to really connect folks that are trying to accomplish the same thing, but approaching it from different angles. And so got to step into that through the opportunity during COVID. So yeah, it kind of grew, and initially I was like, it's going to be, single tiered, and it wasn't once I got the opportunity to kind of help these partners accomplish success to the degree that Microsoft wanted them to.
It's such a great
That was
story.
long-winded.
No, no, no. It's actually a great story, because what I was hearing that is using your voice to convey ideas, and whatever you were doing with that partner turned into using your voice that created influence and had some influence strategy across the partner ecosystem within Microsoft that led to additional leadership opportunities. And I think it's a great example, because it's exactly what I saw in you the first time I met you. It was like, more please of that. So what a great example. I wanted to well, I'll ask you before we move on, because I wanted to pivot. You mentioned authentic leadership earlier, and I want to pivot there. But Are there any other comments you wanted to make around your voice? Any other missteps or, where you saw the ability to connect the dots between disparate teams or within your team that would be really beneficial for our listeners?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is something I learned in our discussions during that coaching period, right? And you kind of said at one point, like you gotta bring some like bravado, like some gusto to some of these, and we were talking about executive presence, right? Like as you're leveraging your voice to accomplish a specific thing, right? Get to good on something, you got to be able to kind of step into the respect and how do you inspire others, and there's a bravado, there's a bit of gusto there. So I think folks have to make that thing their own, right? I think that looks differently for different people, but for me it was like a confidence thing, right? So like, hey, step into who you are when you're talking to folks, and then you can't do that to your own benefit, right? So after we had this discussion about stepping into your voice and bringing that confidence, that bravado, that gusto to certain scenarios, you can't just use that to elevate yourself. You have to use your voice to also elevate others, right? So like it's not just going to be me pulling myself up. It's got to be me pulling others up and others pulling me up, right? So sometimes a way to strengthen my voice was strengthening and elevating others, right? And I think as we think about how we leverage our voice and how we're going to make an impact, we have to think about not just us in that. We got to think about those that are around us and those that we're looking to help um, sort of tackle some of the same challenges that we are. I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. There's a team of folks behind me that help get me to good, and I've got to be able to leverage my voice to do that for them as well.
Such a great example. It reminds me when I first became a general manager, my team started asking me to be an executive sponsor on some sales pursuits we were with some existing customers. And I really had to get my head around that because um, I needed to be what they needed me to be in front of that customer, which was the voice and face of Microsoft, somebody that could move mountains and do things. And so I still had to be myself, but I had to bring that bravado or swagger, as I like to say, right? And that was a mental shift. And it sounds like you had that same thing as well. And I think a lot of our up and coming, senior leaders will need to make that shift as well in their thought process and their actions. And I like how you make it about others, right? Because it's not about yourself. It's about what the team needs you to do and what it means to be fully stepped into your role.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you explain it there, and as you kind of walk through that, like it feels like there's a lot of weight to it. Hey, my team asked me to step in and be this person, and for me, like you asked me to step in and be that person, and I'm like, I'm definitely not that person, but yeah, if you're able to kind of, for me, take a step back, and it's not for me, it's not for me to elevate me, it's for me to elevate them. So how do you step into that? I love that example. Good example there.
Thank you. So you brought up authentic leadership, and as I, coach leaders, senior leaders, CEOs, this idea of authentic leadership, everybody wants to lead that way. Everybody knows it when they see it. Everybody knows it's important, but most people wonder, how do I do it? It's easier said than done, right? How have you thought about authentic leadership? Is it something that came natural to you? Is it something that you struggled with? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think authentic leadership for me has been a transformative journey, right? I think one that many leaders are on it, and you don't necessarily have to be a people leader to sort of embark on that journey, but when you think about, kind of bringing the full you to everything that you do as you attempt to lead. Um, it's a journey, right? I think back to that coaching program, right? And one of the things that uh, was called out, right, as a development opportunity for me was that confidence, right? And we talked a little about that earlier. And while I don't know that I exhibited a lack of confidence. I was very aware of how I was perceived, how I showed up in front of folks, and so that prevented me from really stepping into the full me. Right, I was very aware of how I was perceived, and that awareness led to this dichotomy between like Derek the professional and the one that was expected to conform to norms, and then the other that was like really wanting to lead in an authentic manner. I'll give a quick example of that. Like I've got my kids, right? My kids are at home at times when I'm working, and I'm on calls a lot, video calls a lot, and my kids will be running around, and they'll hear me on a call being very sort of formal, non-casual, professional, and I'll hang that call up, and they'll say, "Hey, Dad." You want some ice cream, or it's time for dinner, or let's go outside and play soccer. And can you do that right now? And I've shed the professional. It's now like real Derek, if you will. And I'm like, nah, not right now. I'm good. Let's do that in a couple of minutes. And so my kids, are like, okay, there's this professional dad, and then there's this like at home dad. And I refer to that as code switching, right? So code switching initially was like the process that folks went through when they spoke different languages, right? In a single conversation, sometimes it's hard to, if you're learning a new language, to shed the primary and revert to the secondary. More broadly, I think there's this, for me, this hip, this hopscotching with regard to the way that I show up culturally and linguistically in specific spaces. Professional is one of those, and then how I bring my own identity to the discussions and the conversations that I'm in. So it was a bit of a, like I think I was very aware of that early. My kids, really helped me get to grips with like, hey, you got to mesh those two, right? You can't be this one because they're both you, right? But like one is like forced you, and then one is like you. And so you got to be able to bring that full you into everything that you do. And so that's kind of like the route that I started on, and some of the growth bit um, that led me to where I am today.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions about that, but before I do, I need to point out that you said hopscotch. I have not said that word in years. Do you hopscotch with your daughters, with your young daughters? You do, don't you? They make you do that.
We definitely do.
Oh
Yes,
wow,
we get
that
out,
is
in
priceless.
the garage. Yeah,
Okay,
draw the chalk and do the hopscotch
sorry.
thing.
Sorry to my listeners. I had to ask that question or I couldn't focus on the rest of this conversation because I just love that reference. Okay, so thank you for sharing. This is so real, Derek, and something that I experienced. And I'm going to guess like the majority of folks who are listening experience it. So you recognize the issue. You have the people that are closest to you saying, are you on the right track around how you're showing up everywhere so that you're, the real Derek everywhere? Recognizing that, of course, there's different ways you moderate yourself in different situations. That's life in general. Have you been able to bring more of the real Derek to work? Or is it still a process for you? Anything you would like to share about, and what happens when you do?
No, no, yeah, yeah. I think I've grown a bit. I remember like being in a discussion with a senior leader when I was at Microsoft, and they said like, I want to see the real Derek, and I was like, what do you mean the real Derek? Like I am the real Derek. He's like, no, I want to see the real Derek. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I am my real self. Now we didn't really get to unpack what it is that he was looking for, but after that conversation, I got to where I got with my kids, like, hey, there is this professional Derek, and then there's this personal Derek that I wasn't inviting folks to get to meet. And so like a pivotal after that, right? A pivotal point in the journey for me was recognizing that I didn't just need to mimic others, right? So like I'd be in scenarios where I could see these professional giants, right? Like I could see Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, speak. I could see Amy Hood the CFO of Microsoft speak, and I'd watch them, and I'm like, "Ah, man, I want to deliver like they deliver." And like I said earlier, I'm really good at mimicking folks, and so like I could take their mannerisms, and I could take, the way that they introduce pauses into the discussion. I could think, I could pause for a second, really think about something, and deliver something that was valuable. But it wasn't about. I think that the pivotal point for me was recognizing that you can't just mimic. You've got to be able to embrace and express your true self. And so I remember this time I was at, while at Microsoft, I was asked to give a presentation on like sales strategy to SMC. So this big organization at the time, it was like, I think it was 500, 600 folks. And I was going to stand in front of, hundreds of people in person, as well as the folks that weren't local, were on the recording, on our team's recording. And so, like thinking about delivering value in that kind of setting for me was crippling, right? So like I was like, well, I can't like be me, because that's not what you're expected to be in these scenarios. Like you got to be professional, you got to show up and deliver value. And so I took a step back, and I thought like, I'm going to need to do a couple of things here, and it's not just going to be a, show up, not practice, and deliver value. So I stepped back. I thought about, how am I going to build trust with the audience? How am I going to engage the audience? Like I think when leaders are genuine, honest, and transparent, they create an environment where folks are like valued and motivated. And I needed to do that in this session. And so I was thinking about that, like, how could I do that? How can I be intentional about that? Folks are really tuned into like the BS meter. They know when they're being fed something, and they know when they're being invited in to receive something. And so I needed to be on the latter half of that. And then the self-awareness and emotional intelligence lens came in. We talked about that earlier in the using your voice bit. I needed to understand my weaknesses and my strengths and my values, and bring those to bear during this session. And so what I tried to do was, on the engaging, building trust side, was like I started the session with this whole, you know, message around like, I've got a following of folks, a social following of folks who I've been telling I'm going to stand up in front of this group and deliver a bunch of value. Stay tuned, right? And so prior to even beginning with the message that I was delivering to that group, I was like, hey, I'm going to do the thing. And I got to go back to my following. I tell them that it went well. So let's do this. Let's take a selfie right now that is exciting and is engaging and indicates like we had a good time here. And then if I bomb, it doesn't matter. And so like very out of my character, right? Ran to the corner of the room with my phone and took a selfie. I don't do this at all. Like not professionally. Like you got to like stand up and be professional, and that wasn't me, right? So I ran to the corner of the room, got everybody to like get all excited, jump up and yell, and I snapped the selfie, and it's still on LinkedIn today. And that just like it brought the group in, at least the group in the room in, and then like I was able to deliver the message with less fear. I think the room trusted me, and I don't think that's a big sort of audience perspective that you should take. Like I could building trust and engaging folks is something that you can do in one-on-one fashion. The self-awareness and emotional intelligence is a one-on-one fashion type thing. The session ended up going really well. I was able to lean a bit more on this blended Derek while leading that organization through strategies that would help them achieve success throughout the rest of the fiscal year. But it wasn't something that I walked easily into. Like I said earlier, crippling fear going into that, and then how do I make this as valuable as I can for the audience? So and there's still growth there, right? But as I started thinking about being the authentic me after some of those conversations, I've taken a step back and then thinking about the core principles that I needed to deliver on were helpful.
Well, I love that story because I don't think you're saying, hey, start all your presentations with a selfie. But for you in that moment, that felt really authentic. Like, yeah, let's have some fun. Let's go do this. And my guess, I wasn't there, but my guess is the audience responded really well to that. Not because they love taking selfies, but because they felt that it was super you and authentic and different and really interesting and unique. And then they got to hear all of your brilliance around sales strategy or cybersecurity or what else, which was obviously like super, we're here to do business. But what a great example. And I hope that, you'll continue to lean into that side. I want to say that I really appreciate you sharing, so much of your leadership journey, because what we haven't really talked about, I mean, today, here you are presenting to boards on a monthly basis as you represent your business at Armor. You are out there representing for global sales, the company and what's going on. So I really appreciate you kind of bringing us back into your journey and sharing real stuff. So I am, as we wrap, there's a couple questions I was curious about. One is, on your LinkedIn, it says making the impossible possible, dot, 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 with technology. And it caught my attention because I really do believe anything's possible. And there's a whole series of why I believe that. But I'm curious, why do you have that? Like, do you really believe anything's possible? And is it just with technology, or is that sort of a mindset and a mantra for you? We've never talked about this before.
We haven't. Yeah, that's a good one. And you kind of went back to the Wayback Machine, right? Like I changed it, and that, yeah, I did have that initially, and still something that I believe in today. I mean, I think that comes from my mom. I mean, look, I grew up in a single parent household, and my mom spent as much time as she possibly could through two jobs. My mom worked a number of jobs as a single parent, trying to hold down a three children household, which was a challenge. I've got kids now, and I have a partner, right? Angela, my wife, and I do as good a job as we can with the kiddos. And my mom did it by herself, and I frequently have to go back to my mom and say, I'm sorry, I apologize, I get it now. But my mom was like trying to, and she was trying to grow us individually. She was trying to empower us as often as she could. And self-confidence, strength of mind, and independence were like three things that she was all about, right? Can't wasn't in her vocabulary. I remember as a kid, like for discipline, because we got in trouble a lot. My mom would take us to the track, right, every Saturday, and my mom was like, "We're gonna warm up with a mile," and I'm like 8. 8, 6, and 4 are our ages at the time. So you're going to warm up with a mile, and then I grew up in California, and so we'd go to the University of Berkeley, and in their football stadium, they had the football stadium and the track were separated, and so we go then to the football stadium, and my mom's like, "You're gonna run every stair in this stadium," and so like through some encouragement, an 8-year-old halfway through that is like, "I can't do it," and my mom's like, "No, you're gonna find a way to do it," and I ended up doing it, and I mean, my childhood is littered with examples like that, but my mom was like, "You're going to figure out, how to overcome whatever it is that is stopping you from getting to this place of good." And that trickles down to my kids. Like I have two girls, and I'm all about self-confidence, strength of mind, independence. Like you don't let anybody think for you. You think for yourself, right? Like you are the owner of your emotions, and like I'm trying to impart as much of that as I can into my kids. Um, but that was like the no can't thing was like nothing's impossible. You're gonna figure out a way to get to good, and or else, So as I'm older, when I was a kid, you had to do it. But as I got older, that stuck with me, and I live by that, and I try to get my family, those that are close to me, to live by that as well.
I love that. I'm gonna have to interview your mom one day. She sounds amazing. And
She's the
and
real one you want. Yeah, she's the one you want.
and hearing that story, I actually see how that all plays out in the way you run your team, though, which maybe is a conversation for another day. Just that can-do attitude, or we're going to go figure things out that are ambiguous, and we're going to go make things happen. Well, Derek, I really appreciate having you on. I have one last question that I've been asking everybody. So, if you could give just one piece of advice about being a leader, just one, what would that be?
I mean, don't limit yourself. right? So we talked a little about the authentic leadership bit. We talked about the using your voice bit, and there's a lot that goes along with that. But I think you have to step into who you are and let that kind of guide the way to success. So limiting yourself prevents you from doing that. And so I think for me, sometimes it helps. I know early on in my career, I'd have to just, put a sticky note on my computer and remind myself all the reasons why I'm the right person for this thing, job, project, what have you, why the team chose me to be the one to do that, the unique talent to be able to do that, and then kind of lean into my ability to go do a thing and not limit myself. That was something that I did not do early on in my career. So just simply not limiting yourself.
Well, it sounds like that's all gone away. So I can't wait to continue to watch you continue to soar in your career, Derek. Thank you so much for just being so real with us today. And dare I say, authentic. And I enjoy getting to know you and your family a little bit better, your leadership journey. And I know our listeners did as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me, Jamie. This has been fantastic. It's always good to get to talk with you. We get to do that frequently. Folks don't, so I think the podcast is a great opportunity for folks to get a bit of you that I am able to get occasionally. So great deal here, Jamie. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please join us every Tuesday as we continue to bring you insider access to executive leadership.